There was a light drizzle that morning when Keanu Reeves decided to take a quiet walk through the old neighborhood he had once lived in as a struggling actor. He wore a simple hoodie, hoping no one would recognize him. He liked it that way, just a man among people, free from flashing cameras and shallow questions. As he passed a small park, he heard a faint sniffle. He turned and saw a young girl, maybe 13, sitting on a worn-out bench. She wore clothes that looked too thin for the cold. Her shoes were torn, toes peeking through the holes. Next to her was a plastic bag that seemed too heavy for her. Small hands. Keanu hesitated for a moment, but something about the way she held the bag close to her chest pulled him in. He sat down on the other end of the bench. "Hey," he said softly, his voice careful not to startle her. "Are you okay?" The girl wiped her nose with her sleeve and gave him a shy look. "Yeah, I'm just waiting." "Waiting for what?" he asked, genuinely curious. "Waiting for someone who needs these," she said, patting the bag. Keanu looked at the bag again. He noticed her fingers were red from the cold, but she held onto that bag like it was her only treasure. "What's inside?" he asked. She looked down, tears filling her eyes. "My dad's shoes. He died last winter. He always said his shoes could take someone anywhere, as long as they walked with a good heart." She sniffled again. "I thought maybe someone else needs them now." Keanu felt a lump form in his throat. In all his years of fame, he had never heard something so pure. "That's very kind of you. You're giving away something that means so much to you." The girl nodded. "I want someone to feel safe, like I did when he was here." Just then, Keanu noticed her shoes again. They were worse than bad. They were almost falling apart. "Why don't you wear them?" he asked gently. The girl looked up, surprised. "They're too big for me, and they're his. I feel like they should help someone who can use them right." Keanu's mind drifted back to his own father, who had left him when he was young. He remembered how empty his pockets were as a boy, but how full his heart felt whenever someone showed him a small act of kindness. He looked at this girl and felt the same warmth and pain mixing inside him. "What's your name?" Keanu asked. "Emma," she whispered. Double quotes, "Emma, I think you're braver than most people I know," he said, with a soft smile. "Would you mind if I saw the shoes?" Emma carefully opened the bag. Inside were a pair of old leather shoes, polished but cracked with age. They were clearly once cared for with love. Keanu held one gently, almost like it was something fragile. "These are beautiful," he said. "Your dad must have been a good man." Emma nodded again. "He was the best. He told me to share what I can, even if I have nothing else." The rain started to pick up, but neither of them moved. They sat there, a famous actor and a poor girl with her father's shoes. To strangers connected by the simplest act of kindness. Keanu felt something shift inside him. All the money, the cars, the awards, none of that compared to the feeling he got sitting beside Emma on that old bench. "Emma," he said, turning to face her fully, "I have an idea, but only if you say yes." She looked at him, puzzled. "What idea?" "What if I wear your dad's shoes? But only if you let me promise that I'll walk with a good heart, just like he did." Emma's eyes widened. "Really? But you're Keanu Reeves, right?" Keanu chuckled. "Yes, I am. But right now, I'm just someone who wants to carry your dad's kindness forward." Emma looked down at the shoes and then back at him. Her lips trembled as she smiled. "Then yes. But promise me, you'll always help people." Keanu held out his pinky. "Pinky promise." Emma wrapped her tiny pinky around his. They both laughed through their tears as the rain fell harder. At that moment, Keanu knew this was the start of something bigger than himself. He didn't know how yet, but he knew one thing for sure. Emma's father's shoes were about to change more lives than anyone could ever imagine, and deep down, Emma didn't know it either. But her act of giving would one day come back to her in a way that would leave the whole world speechless. The next morning, Keanu sat on the edge of his hotel bed, holding Emma's father's shoes in his hands. They looked worn but strong, the kind that had carried a man through tough times. Keanu thought about the promise he made to Emma to carry her father's kindness forward. He slipped the shoes on. They were a little big, but they fit well enough to walk. He looked at himself in the mirror and couldn't help but feel different. Not like an actor getting into character, but like a man stepping into someone else's story. Instead of calling his driver, Keanu walked out the door, wearing the old shoes. The city was waking up, people rushing to work, horns honking, shopkeepers lifting metal shutters. As he walked down the street, nobody recognized him. People glanced at the shoes, maybe wondering why a man like him were something so old. He didn't care. Each step reminded him of Emma, her tiny fingers so cold, yet her heart so warm. He wanted to do something for her, but he didn't want it to feel like charity. He needed it to mean something more. As he walked, he found himself at a small diner. He stepped inside, shaking off the drizzle. The waitress behind the counter gave him a polite smile. "Table for one?" she asked. "Yes, please," Keanu replied. He sat by the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. He kept thinking about Emma. Did she have breakfast that morning? Did she have warm clothes? Questions twisted inside him like knots. Then he noticed a young man outside, maybe 16 or 17, standing under the awning trying to stay dry. The boy looked at the menu taped to the window, but didn't come inside. His clothes were thin, and his eyes looked tired. Keanu motioned to the waitress. "Could you bring him in and give him whatever he wants to eat? I'll pay." The waitress peeked out the window. "Him? Are you sure?" Keanu nodded. "He's probably hungrier than me." A few minutes later, the boy sat across from Keanu, eyes wide with confusion. "Why are you doing this?" the boy asked. "Because I promised someone I'd help people who need it," Keanu said. The boy looked down at Keanu's shoes. "Nice kicks," he said with a small grin. Keanu laughed. "Thanks. They belong to a good man." The boy ate fast, as if he hadn't had a full meal in days. When he was done, he wiped his mouth and stood up to leave. "Wait," Keanu said, pulling out a small card from his wallet. "If you ever need help finding work, call this number. They help young people like you get back on their feet." The boy stared at the card, then at Keanu. "Why do you care?" he asked quietly. Keanu looked at the rain falling outside. "Because someone cared enough to share their father's shoes with me. Kindness has to keep going." The boy didn't know what to say, so he just nodded and left, clutching the card like it was a key to another life. Keanu paid the bill and walked back into the rain. He felt the shoes getting heavier with water, but every step felt lighter in his heart. Later that day, he called his manager. "Cancel my meetings," he said. "I want to visit some shelters around here." His manager was confused. "Keanu, you have press events, I know, but this is more important," Keanu said, his voice firm. "Tell them I'm busy walking for the next few days." Keanu went from shelter to shelter. He met people who had lost everything, people who had nothing but stories of better days. He listened. He gave out warm food, jackets, and most importantly, his time. Everywhere he went, people noticed the old shoes. They asked about them, and he always told them the same thing. These belonged to a man who walked with a good heart. The story of the shoes spread quietly, like a secret blessing passed from one mouth to another. Some people recognized him, but they didn't ask for autographs. They just thanked him for showing up, for being there without cameras or headlines. Meanwhile, Emma sat by her small window, hugging her knees to her chest. She didn't know what had happened to the man on the bench. She just hoped he was walking somewhere good. She couldn't imagine that her father's shoes were already carrying stories. She would one day hear stories that would bring her more than just warmth. They would bring her hope she never knew was possible. The days turned into a week, and Keanu kept wearing the old shoes everywhere he went. He felt their weight and their purpose with every step. Sometimes he wondered if Emma knew what her gift was doing, how her late dad's shoes were becoming something more than just shoes. They were becoming a promise passed on. One evening, Keanu sat in a small community center, waiting for a meeting with a group that helped homeless families. He looked down at the shoes. The leather was now scuffed, the soles more worn than before. Yet he felt closer than ever to Emma's father, a man he'd never met but felt he understood. As he waited, an old woman sat next to him. She wore a faded coat and had gentle eyes that seemed to have seen too much. She looked down at his feet and smiled. "Those are some well-loved shoes," she said kindly. Keanu smiled back. "They are. They belong to a man who believed in kindness." She nodded, eyes twinkling. "And you wear them well. They'll take you places you don't expect." Keanu thought about her words long after the meeting ended. That night, he sat in his hotel room and called his assistant. "Find Emma," he said. "Her name is Emma. She lives near that old park. I need to see her again." The assistant was confused. "Keanu, we have a shoot next week. You can't just find her." Keanu interrupted softly. "It's important." The next day, Keanu walked the neighborhood again. He passed the same park bench where he first met Emma. It was empty now, just damp from the morning dew. He wondered where she was, if she was okay, if she had enough to eat. Hours passed before his assistant called him back. I think I found her. She lives at a shelter the blocks from where you met her. Without a second thought, Keanu started walking. His heart beat faster with each step. He didn't know what he'd say to her, but he knew he had to see her face again. He wanted her to know what her small gift had done, how it had changed him. When he reached the shelter, he saw her through a small window. She sat at a long table, helping a much younger boy with his homework. Her hair was tied back, her sleeves too short for her arms, but she was smiling, that same shy smile he had seen on the bench. Keanu waited by the door, not wanting to interrupt. When Emma finally looked up, her eyes widened. She dropped her pencil and ran over, nearly tripping, over her chair. "You came back," she said, hugging him tightly around the waist. "Are you okay? Are the shoes okay?" Keanu laughed gently, feeling the hug wash warmth through him. "They're perfect. They've been busy." Emma looked down and saw the shoes, now more worn, but shining with stories. "Where did they take you?" she asked. Keanu crouched down so they were eye level. "They took me to people who needed help. They reminded me what it feels like to care about strangers. And they reminded me that sometimes the biggest hearts come from the smallest people." Emma blushed. "Did you help a lot of people?" "I did," Keanu said, "but it's not enough. I want to do more." She tilted her head. "Like what?" Keanu looked around the shelter, the cracked walls, the squeaky chairs, the tired faces of mothers and kids who had nowhere else to go. He knew right then what he wanted to do. "Emma, would you help me start something?" he asked. Her eyes grew wide. "Me? Yes, you," he said, his voice soft but certain. "What if we make sure no kid has to sit in the cold like you did? What if your dad's shoes walk so far they build a home for everyone who needs one?" Emma didn't understand at first. "Like a big shelter?" "Bigger," Keanu said, standing up and lifting her into his arms. "A place with warm beds, good food, and people who care. And we'll call it your dad's name, to remind everyone who comes through the door that kindness can change everything." Emma's eyes filled with tears. She buried her face in his shoulder, nodding over and over. In that tiny shelter room, they made a promise. The girl who gave away her father's shoes and the man who chose to wear them. Neither of them knew it yet, but those shoes would soon inspire people around the world. Because kindness doesn't stop when you pass it on. It grows, step by step. Asterisk: the news about Keanu Reeves wearing a pair of old shoes spread like a quiet wave through the city. At first, people whispered about it on street corners, in coffee shops, on late-night radio shows. They couldn't believe it. The famous actor walking around in scuffed shoes that looked like they belonged to another time. But when people learned why, the story touched something deep in their hearts. It wasn't about fame anymore. It was about a promise, a poor girl, and a father's love that didn't die with him. Keanu worked with his team to put the plan in motion. The shelter wasn't going to be just any building. It would be warm, safe, and filled with people who understood how it felt to have nothing but hope. He wanted Emma to be part of every decision, no matter how small. One afternoon, they sat together at a dusty table in the shelter office. Stacks of papers, sketches of buildings, and lists of names covered the surface. Emma swung her legs under her chair, trying to read the words. "Emma," Keanu said, leaning close so she could see better, "what do you think this place should have?" She thought hard. "Beds, soft ones, with blankets that smell nice." Keanu wrote it down. "Okay, what else?" Emma tapped her pencil on her lip. "A place where kids can play, and a big kitchen so nobody goes hungry." He smiled. "Anything else?" She looked out the window for a long moment, then whispered, "Someone to listen when we're scared." Keanu's chest tightened. He knew too well what it felt like to have nobody to talk to when you're afraid. He reached out and squeezed her hand. "That's the most important thing of all." Days turned into weeks. Emma came with Keanu to meet architects, volunteers, and donors. Every time someone asked him why he was doing this, he pointed down to the old shoes on his feet and said, "These shoes remind me that one small act of kindness can walk all the way around the world." People didn't laugh. They didn't doubt him. They believed him because they saw the way he looked at Emma, the way he treated her like an equal partner in the dream. One rainy evening, after a long day of meetings, they sat together in a cafe. Emma sipped hot chocolate, her feet swinging off the chair. Keanu looked at her and said, Emma, how are you feeling about all this? She shrugged. Sometimes I think maybe I shouldn't have given you the shoes. Keanu was surprised. Why would you think that? Because they were all I had left of my dad, she said, staring into her cup. But now they're not mine anymore. Keanu moved his chair closer and spoke gently. Emma, your dad's shoes are still yours. There. Just carrying his love to people who need it most. Every step I take in them, it's like your dad is walking to. Emma looked up, her eyes shiny with tears. Do you really think he's proud of me? Keanu didn't answer with words. Instead, he knelt down and placed the shoes on the table. They were battered, soaked from the rain, but they looked like they glowed in the cafe's soft light. Emma, he said softly, your dad's shoes took me places I never thought I'd go. They showed me what really matters, and you're the bravest girl I've ever met. He would be so proud. Emma leaned forward and hugged him, holding on so tight that Keanu felt her small heartbeat against his chest. She didn't say anything more. She didn't have to. The warmth between them was enough. The next morning, they visited an empty lot where the new shelter would be built. The ground was muddy, the sky gray and heavy with clouds. Keanu lifted Emma onto his shoulders so she could see everything. What do you think? He asked, spinning her around so she could see the space that would soon be filled with laughter, warmth, and safety. Emma grinned. I think Dad's shoes are going to walk a really, really long way. Keanu laughed, feeling the mud squish under his feet. Yeah, and we're just getting started. He looked down at the old shoes, soaked and heavy, but all he felt was light, because in that muddy lot, with a poor girl on his shoulders and a promise in his heart, he knew the real work had only just begun. Weeks turned into months, and the empty lot that once smelled of mud and old grass began to change. It started with the sound of shovels breaking earth, then the hum of machines, and finally the voices of people who believed in something bigger than themselves. Keanu visited the site almost every day, always wearing Emma's father's shoes. No matter how worn they looked, the workers smiled when they saw him walking through the dust and gravel. They didn't see a movie star. They saw a man who remembered what it felt like to have nothing but hope. Emma came to. Whenever she could, she'd stand by Keanu's side in her tiny boots, her hands tucked into his big coat pockets to keep warm. She'd ask 100 questions. What's that machine for? Why is that pipe there? How many rooms will there be? Keanu answered every single one, even when he didn't know the answer himself. One day, after a long walk around the site, they sat on a pile of wooden planks. Emma pulled her knees to her chest and rested her chin on them. Keanu, she said, her voice small but clear, what happens when the shelter is finished? Keanu looked at her, the wind ruffling her hair. Then we open the doors. People will come in. They'll have a warm place to sleep, good food to eat, and people who listen when they're scared. Emma bit her lip. What if they don't come? He reached out and brushed her hair back. Emma, they will come because people need a place to feel safe, just like you did. And your dad's shoes are leading them here. Emma stared at his feet. The shoes were covered in dust. The leather cracked even more. They're so old now. Are you going to throw them away when the shelter is done? Keanu chuckled. Never. These shoes are part of this place. When we finish, I'm going to put them somewhere safe, maybe in a glass box in the entrance, so everyone who comes through the door knows how it all started. Emma's eyes lit up. Like a museum. Kind of, Keanu said. But better, because every person who walks past them will know that small things can change big things. Just then, one of the workers came over. He was a big man with calloused hands and a kind smile. He bent down to Emma's level. Miss Emma, he said, we want you to hammer in the first piece of wood for the children's playroom. You started all this, so it should be you. Emma's mouth fell open. She looked at Keanu for permission. He nodded with a grin. The worker handed her a small hammer. Her tiny hands wrapped around the handle. Keanu knelt beside her, steadying her grip. Together, they tapped the first nail into the wood. It wasn't perfect, and the hammer slipped. Once, but everyone around them cheered. Emma's single quotes, cheeks flushed with pride. Do you think my dad is watching? Keanu put his arm around her. Emma, I think he's right here. Every time you smile, he's smiling too. After that day, more people came to help. Some donated money, some gave time, some just showed up with warm food for the workers. Local kids came with their parents, asking if they could paint the walls when it was done. Old men who had once been homeless stood side by side with volunteers, lifting beams and painting fences. Keanu knew they had started something unstoppable. He didn't want cameras or press releases. He didn't care if people knew his name. He wanted them to remember the shoes and the girl who gave them Dot one night after the workers had gone home. Keanu and Emma stood at the edge of the half-finished building. The moonlight poured through the empty window frames, casting soft shadows on the dusty floor. Emma reached down and touched the shoes on Keanu's feet. "Thank you for wearing them," she whispered. Keanu knelt down and hugged her tight. "Thank you for giving them to me." He looked around at the walls rising up around them, walls that would soon shelter laughter, whispers, and new dreams. He thought about the first time he saw Emma on that park bench, alone but brave, holding onto a bag full of her father's love. Now, because of her, hundreds of people would have a place to feel safe. And deep inside, Keanu knew the real miracle wasn't in the building or the money. It was in the shoes, in the simple act of a poor girl who chose to give away her last treasure because she believed in something good. The story was far from over. The hardest part was yet to come, but Keanu was ready, and he knew, as long as he wore those shoes, he'd never walk alone. Months later, the shelter was almost ready. The walls were painted warm colors. Every room smelled like fresh wood and new beginnings. The playroom had soft rugs and shelves filled with books and toys that volunteers had donated. In the big dining hall, long tables waited for families to sit together and share a meal without worrying if they'd eat. Tomorrow, Keanu stood by the entrance one evening, looking down at the shoes on his feet. They were more than shoes now. They were a story, a promise, and a reminder that people need each other more than they ever admit. Emma was inside, helping a group of kids draw pictures to hang on the walls. Her cheeks were rosy, her eyes brighter than they had ever been. She was different now, not because she had more things, but because she had hope. When the grand opening day came, the shelter buzzed with people, families with children, old men with walking sticks, young mothers holding babies. They all came, drawn by the rumor that someone cared enough to build them a place to rest. Keanu stood with Emma beside the glass box they placed in the entrance. Inside, resting on a small wooden stand, were her father's shoes. They were cracked, stained with mud and dust, but they were beautiful. Beside them, a small plaque read, "These shoes carry kindness farther than anyone could imagine." Emma squeezed Keanu's hand. "Do you think they'll remember him?" she asked, her voice quiet in the middle of the noisy room. "They won't just remember him," Keanu said, smiling. "They'll feel him every time someone walks through these doors. They'll know someone believed in them before they even knew it." The mayor came to speak. Photographers took pictures. Reporters tried to ask Keanu for statements about his next movie. He didn't care. He just stayed close to Emma, watching the families explore their new home. He overheard a little boy tugging at his mother's coat. "Mommy, can we stay here forever?" The mother wiped her eyes and nodded. Outside, it began to rain, just like the day Keanu first met Emma. Instead of feeling cold, the shelter glowed with warmth. Inside, the children laughed as they chased each other down the hallways that smelled of fresh paint. And dreams come true. Later that night, when the guests had gone and the families were settling into their rooms, Keanu and Emma sat together on a bench outside the shelter. Rain dripped from the roof, but they didn't mind. "You did it," Emma said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "No," Keanu said softly, "we did it. Your dad did it. His shoes did it." Emma closed her eyes and listened to the rain. She imagined her dad walking beside them, smiling at the people inside, proud of what his old shoes had done. Keanu knew he would keep walking, not just with his feet, but with his heart. He had more movies to make, more places to go, but now he carried Emma's father with him forever. He promised himself that every time he felt tired or lost, he'd remember that small girl on the park bench, the gift she gave him, and the kindness that grew from it. As the lights inside the shelter glowed through the darkness, Keanu whispered to Emma, "Your dad's shoes changed the world, and they'll keep walking as long as we do." Emma smiled, warm and safe beside him, and somewhere in the soft sound of the falling rain, it felt like her father was whispering back, telling them both to keep going, step by step. Because sometimes the smallest shoes can leave the biggest footprints.